My name is Gail Bergen. I am a recent transplant to the Pacific Northwest. I spent most of my career in Texas, so I've just been up here a couple of years now. I'm going to be talking today about memoirs. That is my specialty. I love true stories. I love true stories. I love writing true stories. I love reading true stories. I am naturally drawn to nonfiction. I read memoirs. I read true crime. I'll read anything written by a journalist. I read about 3 newspapers a day. I think the human interest stories turned into books are some of the most fascinating things written, and those are the stories worth telling. I have written 1 memoir, and I have a nonfiction blog that is coming up on its 5th anniversary. So I have done a lot of nonfiction writing in the last 5 years. When writing a memoir, can you guys hear me okay, by the way? Yeah. Is everything good there? There we go. When writing a memoir, what often happens is that we get into some very difficult and dicey subject matter. People usually choose to write a memoir because they have experienced some kind of trauma. That's almost always what triggers it. That trauma can be divorce, it can be child abuse, it can be sexual abuse, it can be domestic violence, it can be addiction, it can be mental illness, LGBTQ issues, it can be a bad boss that we have suffered under for years. Maybe you were a soldier returning from war and you have suffered PTSD and recovered from that, and you need to write about that. Not always, but 9 times out of 10, it's women writing a memoir. Not always, but usually it's women. But these are the types of issues that tend to end up in memoir. Usually, our family members end up intricately involved in these stories, because if you are talking about abuse, usually it's a family member who has been our abuser. So how do we do that? How do we write those stories? How do we write down those painful episodes when we are discussing family members, when we are potentially exposing family secrets, we are potentially exposing business secrets, we are potentially upsetting people, possibly estranging ourselves from family members, or even risking a lawsuit? How do we navigate a story like that? First and foremost, you need to know something. You need to know and be assured that your experiences are your own. If something happened to you, you have every right in the world to talk about it, to write about it, to discuss it, to learn from it, and to help others who may have experienced the same thing learn from your mistakes and learn from your recovery process. Anne Lamott is a well-known author who wrote something in a book of hers that she published in 1995. This book was titled Bird by Bird, Some Instructions on Writing and Life. And these lines that she wrote became a rallying cry for writers all over the world. She wrote, "You own everything that happened to you. You tell your stories. If people wanted you to write warmly about them, they should behave better." I tell you, writers all over the world latched on to those sentences, and they said thank you, because she gave them permission to write their truths. But how you go about that is key. With memoir writing, more than any other, the risk of a libel lawsuit is probably the highest. But there's many things we can do to protect ourselves, and most of these are very easy. So I'm going to just go through a short little laundry list here of things we can do if you're thinking about writing a memoir or you're in the middle of one. First and foremost, do not write anything that's not true. And do not write anything that is highly exaggerated. Stick to the facts. Stick to the facts as you know them, as you understand them, or as you remember them. And if you have backup material for what you've written in your book, be sure and hang on to that. And what I mean by that is if someone came after you published your book and said, that is a complete lie. I wasn't even in town that day. I was in Florida on vacation, so what you wrote there is a complete lie. If you have a letter, an email, a text message, a photograph, a receipt, something that proves that what you have written is true in your memoir, don't throw that away. Always keep your backup. Always protect the integrity of what you've written in your memoir, and don't ever throw it away just in case someone questions you. If you're writing about any kind of abuse situation and you think there is a chance that someone is litigious out there, change your abuser's name and change any distinguishing characteristics he or she might have. Change the way they look, change the name of the company they work for. You can change the city they live in. Change anything that someone might want to use to figure out who that person is, and let other, chance of someone contacting that person and say, hey, you're in this book, and it's pretty awful kind of thing. Do everything you can to protect yourself against that kind of situation. If children are in the book, always change the names. Children, until they get to the age of legal consent, cannot give permission to use their real name, so you must always change children's names. Change anyone's name that you can no longer get in touch with. If you had a coworker 30 years ago and they're in the book, but you have no idea how to get in touch with them anymore, change their name. An old cousin that you're no longer in touch with, change the name. An old best friend from high school that you have no idea where they are anymore, but they are integral to some part of your story. It's just easier to change the name, because it's amazing how those things can come back to bite you if you don't do that. And someone finds out on Facebook that you wrote a book and they read it and they come back at you for it. It's just easier to protect yourself in that situation. If you're using real names, and I have real name, by the way, in my memoir, I changed my ex-husband's name, I changed his distinguishing characteristics, I changed his 4-year-old son's name. I did these things myself, so I took my own advice there. I used real names in my memoir. I used my siblings' real names. I used my parents' real names. You can do that. That's perfectly acceptable. If you want to use your adult children's real names, perfectly acceptable to do that, but you have to get written permission. Written permission, not verbal. Verbal permission can change on a dime. People can get sideways with you for any number of reasons, and they can rescind that verbal permission. So it's very, very important that you get written permission if you're going to use real names. Emails and texts. Very tempting to put emails and texts in your book. And you need to understand that emails, those things are intellectual property. And whoever writes an email or a text owns copyright to that material. And if you want to, you can reproduce those verbatim in your book, but you need written permission to do that. And what I mean by that is, if you want to, word for word, turn that into a pull quote, indent the margins, you know what I'm talking about, indent the margins, italicize it, this is what he wrote back to me, word for word, boom, there's the email. You need written permission for that. And I did that. My memoir is full of emails because that's how I wrote the memoir. These events happened 20 years ago, and I wrote it from an archive of emails. And so in certain instances, I've got the verbatim text in there, but I received written permission to use those from the individuals. Now, what is acceptable, and you don't need written permission for this, is you can paraphrase. So got back to me the next day, and his email essentially said such and such. You can summarize, you can paraphrase. That's acceptable to do that, and you don't need written permission for that. Excuse me. You can use a disclaimer. Everyone has seen these in books. They're either in the what is that, forward, or you'll see them in the author's note. They tend to start out, this book was written to the very best of my recollection, any and all errors are my own, blah, blah, blah. This is a legal loophole. Memoir writers use these all the time. It's a weak loophole, but lawyers advise that if you have explosive material in your memoir, this is one avenue of protection for you. It's in what they used to tell us in Texas is, in Texas, people can sue you for anything. They can sue somebody for looking at you wrong, kind of thing. So this is not gonna, by itself, protect you, but everything like this helps. And so that is one thing that you should do. If you do all of the above and you're still worried, you can always consult an attorney. There are literary attorneys out there who will review manuscripts or review just, what you consider to be the diciest parts of the things you're exposing, the most scary parts of your manuscript. If you're still concerned, they will review those and advise you whether there's anything actionable there. And they will advise you to either revise it or no, it's okay, or I think you should take that out completely, kind of thing. So there are people out there who do this kind of work, and here at Spokane Authors, we can, help you find those resources. The last couple of things I can recommend, and these two kind of take it out of the realm of memoir, but you can write under a pen name. You can change your name completely. You can say you're Kathy Johnson and you're gonna market it under Kathy Johnson, and you're gonna print the book under Kathy Johnson, and you're gonna market it under Kathy Johnson, and your website is gonna say you're Kathy Johnson, and that way no blowback ever comes to you personally. That is one way to do it, but it kind of, it's not a memoir anymore. It's not associated with you personally, but it still has your story. And if you're afraid enough that you don't want anybody associating your story with you personally because you feel like it's too explosive, or it will anger too many family members or an ex-husband or whoever, that's one thing you can do. And the final thing you can do is fictionalize your story. And I know people who've done this. You can completely turn it into a novel. Again, it's no longer a memoir, but you can still get your story out there. You can change everybody's name, including your own. Now you've become just a character in your book. But that is one way to get your story out there, to get it off your chest, and feel safe about doing it. So, those are some ideas of ways to handle memoir and not feel like you're gonna end up in the courts. Has anyone read the book that came out last year, Careless People by Sarah Wynne Williams? It was the expose on Facebook. And I'm sure you've heard about it because it was a New York Times bestseller, and well, I gotta tell you, she didn't do any of this. It was a very, very explosive memoir, and she named Mark Zuckerberg, she named Facebook, she told she violated her NDA right and left by exposing the inner workings of Facebook. And he tried to get that book, he tried to prevent it being released from publishing right before the book came out. All I gotta say is, don't do that. She had to have had, that's the end member of Memoir. She had to have had quite a powerful legal team behind her to be bold enough to release that memoir. And you and I don't have that kind of money and legal heft behind us to, it was a very entertaining book and very eye-opening, but I don't recommend any average person with average resources to be that explosive with the things that they reveal. So how am I doing on time? Good. I'm good? Okay, I just have one last thing, really. The the last thing when you're writing a memoir, and especially if you're talking about anything having to do with a difficult subject matter, is really just knowing when the time is right to write that book. And there's another famous quote, I don't know where or who this one came from, because when I was doing my research it was attributed to so many people. But the saying is, write from the scar, not from the wound. And what that really means is write from the point of view of a healed person. Write from the point of view of someone who has moved on. And a person who has gained some perspective. Oh, geez, this thing is moving. I thought I was moving for a minute there. Right from a point of view of someone who has moved on. If you're still at a place where you're still keeping score, where you're still devastated, where you're still angry, still raw, I would guess that not enough time has passed yet. You can write it down, and it's very cathartic to do that, to write all your memories down, but don't publish it yet. It took me 20 years before I published my memoir, 20 years after the fact of the events that are in the memoir. Now, I'm not saying everyone has to wait 20 years, but you really need to let the fires die down and let some wisdom roll in. And when you do that, you really write a very different book. And that's all I've got.